relationship or a long-term girlfriend throughout most of the second half of school. Started when I was 16, so when I was 17 I was about a year into it, and but she wasn't in school, so I didn't see too much of her during school time. She went to a different school in a different city, so that didn't really come into it at all, but we did go out for years afterwards as well. I was pretty monogamous throughout my teenage years. I didn't have a lot of girlfriends, so I just had this one from when I was 16. So yeah, we did break up eventually, but normal, the way people break up, they grow up and grow apart, and that's that. So that's why I broke up, and such thing as iPods or even CDs back then. I mean, CDs were around, but they were far too expensive. Everybody used cassettes. But I remember making tapes and cassettes of people like the Pixies and the Violent Femmes. And I was even into serious goth stuff. Not that I was a goth, but I used to hang out with lots of people who were. But I actually liked the music more. So obviously The Cure. But I liked really weird ones like Bauhaus and Fields of the Nephilim, and weird people like that. I think if it wasn't popular and wasn't cool, I probably liked it. Smiths. And then, there was a big, huge British musical culture going on then, and it was Britpop. It was pretty popular, and you were again divided down the middle. Did you like Oasis or did you like Blur? And Oasis were, and always have been, in my opinion, a fucking cover band for the Beatles. And while that's nice for 5 minutes, they're just fucking assholes. So I was more into Blur and Damon Albarn, and I liked what they were doing. They were much more talented, much more varied, and they were always coming up with different things for different albums. Whereas Oasis just made the same fucking song and the same fucking album for 10 years. But they were all going. They were really on the rage in the early to mid 90s when I was 17. What else? People like Suede. Loved Suede. Jesus, what else? Anyway, you get the picture. I was one of those alternative indie heads. Yeah. What sports did I do? I didn't do much sports. We were made to do an awful lot in school, during school, and to represent the school in competitions, but outside of that I didn't do much. I ran a lot. I was a very good runner. Athletics, long distance, stuff like that, and that translated into me always being made to play football. That's soccer and Gaelic football. For those people who aren't from this neck of the woods, and I really had no interest, and I wasn't very good at kicking a ball, but I was a fast runner, so they would just put me on the wings and tell me to, travel with the ball and pass it to somebody else who could actually kick it and score a goal, and that was my main job. I've never really liked was never that much into sports, other than running. What activities were you involved in? I kind of spoke about that before on another video that I probably should do a follow-up on, but I did do an awful lot of musicals and plays and drama and things like that. I did a lot of that in school, and a lot of public speaking, debates, all that sort of stuff, which stood me in good stead in later life. It's a great thing to do when you're that age. I think it develops confidence, obviously, but it develops structure and rhetoric and argument and all that jazz. That really does help you once you get to college and real world and real life. So I was more one of those annoying bastards that did stuff like that. TV shows, movies, and games. Jesus, there wasn't that many games. Consoles. That's so long ago. The PlayStation wasn't even out. I mean, the PlayStation came out. PlayStation 1 came out in 97, as far as I can remember. So this was a couple of years before that. I left school a couple of years before that. So, Jesus, it would have been a Sega Mega Drive, 16-bit. So whatever was on, Sonic the Hedgehog or something. I wasn't that much into games. Movies I loved, as you can tell if you're a regular listener. There wasn't much great stuff that came out in 93, as far as I can remember. 93 was when I was 17. first season, and David Caruso was in the first season of NYPD Blue. And David Caruso is the really annoying guy out of CSI Las Vegas. He's a really annoying guy with the shades that has the really corny lines always at the start of every episode, you know, that he removes his shades and says something really corny. That's David Caruso. He's a shit actor. I don't like him at all. And he was in the first series of NYPD Blue, and I think he was fired for being unpopular among the test audiences. So that was one. And most people watched NYPD Blue, but I was in love with another series that was on much, much later and was really darker and much more gritty, and that was Homicide: Life on the Streets. So that was my other big thing. I really liked that. And you know, you talk to maybe 4 other people in the whole school that would stay up that late to watch Homicide. So that's about all for TVs. Were you bullied? And is there stories from that? No, I mentioned it before. I wasn't bullied at all. I actually used to stick up for people, and I used to bully the bullies. Not very often, but I would. I don't know. I remember. I certainly wasn't bullied anyway. I remember getting almost violent with some people who were throwing coins around the place, and one of them nearly hit me in the head. And I kind of grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and had a few words, and that changed everything. You know, all the bullies kind of stayed away from me from then on in. That was about halfway through school. But I remember, you know, if you saw someone being hassled in a corridor or something, you know, go over and tell the bully where to go. And I remember you know, meeting a guy and his nose was bleeding, and he was going into the toilet to kind of clean up. And I followed him in and asked him who did it, and then went up and kind of sorted it out after that and told the guy to leave him alone and stuff like that. You know, I wasn't some sort of a crusading avenger, far from it. I just never liked that, and I was big enough and confident enough to do that. You know, I wasn't winning any favours. I mean, these people didn't turn out to be friends. They were just, you know, normal fellow students. But I just never had any time for them. And then they just left me alone. The maddest version of that was, and this sounds crazy, I was in a class in the second last year, and the teacher was she wasn't a great teacher at all, but she, you know, she tried her best, but she wasn't good at what she was teaching, first of all, and second of all, she wasn't very good at controlling the class. So she was always, you know, playing second fiddle to this, and was playing catch up all the time. And of course, the messers and the assholes and the bullies down the back would just create havoc and, you know, disturb everything. And one day she lost it and called one of the bullies up to the board and put up it was a maths class, so she put up she already had up some really complex problems, and she got this bully up to do the maths problem on the board, and of course he didn't have a clue, so he was kind of mortified and going red and things like that, and she started making fun of him for not knowing, and kind of saying, well, if you spent less time, you know, acting the maggot and more time learning, you'd be able to do this and all of that. And everyone else was laughing at this guy, because you don't get a chance to laugh at a bully like that in safety. And I did something really silly. I remember saying to her in front of everyone, I said it wasn't fair that he didn't know what he was doing, and you know, you were just making it worse. As a teacher, you shouldn't be, you know, calling attention to this sort of stuff, and that it doesn't matter that he's an asshole and a bully, that, you know, no one deserves to be ridiculed like that. And to be fair, she immediately recognised that and apologised, and he sat down. But his face when he sat down, and his face for the next few days looking was at some stage, or certainly could be at some times. I don't know why I did that, I just did. I used to just speak my mind, I think. Did you have close friends? Yeah, I did. I kind of mentioned it before, where all of the clique I was in, they were mostly girls, but a couple of guys, and yeah, we were really close. And kind of drifted away afterwards. I was friendly with one of the guys for a good few years afterwards, but the rest of them drifted by, and now I'm not even in contact with any of them. They kind of went off, grew up. Most of them are abroad. They're not in the country, and recently they started, hooking up on Facebook and getting back in contact, but I never answered any of their requests